Just breathe. Just breathe and breathe and breathe. It's one of the things our body does really well, is know exactly what it needs to do when it needs to be done. It's good with routine, which is what I want to talk to you today about with something. Yes. This conversation that we're about to have, Muse, was actually inspired by a conversation I had on Twitter with an up-and-coming writer. By up-and-coming, I mean they're kind of new to the world of writing. I had posted something a couple days ago that my brain was mush, that I had spent 7 hours writing. And people responded by saying, how in the world do you write for that long? Now, that 7 hours wasn't spent writing the same thing. I wasn't working on the same manuscript, the same project. There was different things that I was working on. But needless to say, after 7 hours of pouring words from my brain, I was just fried. But that's not the point. During this conversation, it became very clear something that I have run into a lot with new writers. And that is how. This one person said, I have struggled for years just to get a short story written. How do you do it? Well, the answer lies in routine. You know that old saying that if you do something 10,000 times, you become an expert at it? Well, that doesn't necessarily and directly apply to writing, in such that if you write 10,000 words, you will become an expert at it. Because you'd be surprised how quickly 10,000 words add up. However, if you spent 10,000 hours writing, you see where I'm going with that. But how do you do it? There's only so much time during the day. Now, I'm lucky. I'm a full-time writer. It's all I do. Well, I write and I record videos and audio books and a number of other things, but mostly I'm a writer. Now, I have been on the other side of the fence. It's been about almost 10 years, I think. Is that right? Yes, almost 10 years. I was working at a day job, and then I was writing. At one point, that day job I was acting. I was in a rep company. So I was spending my days, 8 hours a day rehearsing or performing. And then I would come home and then I would write. And then when I retired, and you never really retire from a creative endeavor. When I stopped becoming a full-time actor and wanted to transition to full-time writer, there was a period where I had a day job. Sorry, I didn't mean to go there. And I was spending 8 to 9 hours a day at the day job, and then I had to come home and find time to write. How did I do it? It begins like this, and this is incredibly important. I set aside an hour a day. Actually, it was night. I set aside an hour of time, and that hour was dedicated to nothing but writing. And I had to be really diligent about that. So when that hour, the top of that hour struck, I was singularly focused. I put my blinders on. I closed my office door, or I just told whoever was living in the house at the time, which was my wife and youngest daughter, that this is my time for writing. Do not, unless it's an emergency, do not interrupt me, please. And they respected that, and it was great. Because what that allowed me to do was get in the habit of writing. And I started out with just an hour because I knew that I couldn't allow for much more than that without ignoring the wants and needs of my family. And most often, at the beginning, that time at first, that time was kind of staggered around. It was whenever I could get it in. And then all of a sudden I realized that if I wanted to be efficient and I really wanted to achieve this goal, I had to set aside the same time every day. And I did that. And eventually that time it eventually crawled into nighttime. And I have found so far the best time for me to write my fiction, especially if it's of the horrific nature or anything venturing near horror, paranormal romance, ghost stories, anything. But now it doesn't matter what I'm writing. If it's fiction, I got to write it at night because there's just something about it. And I think it has to do with the fact that when I first really got into the groove, that hour every day that I set aside for writing was at night. So it ingrained itself in my head. Nighttime is for my fiction. And it took me a while, but eventually I could sit down during that hour, shut everything out, and write. And I could get 1,000 words written in that hour. I became very efficient at it. So I was then able to set a goal, a daily goal of 1,000 words. Okay? Now let me explain to you what that means. With the exception of fantasy, the average length of a novel is 60,000 words or more. Between 60 and 70,000 is the sweet spot for me. If it's less than 60,000, it's a novella. Now, if you're writing 1,000 words a day, you can do the math. It takes about 2 months to write a first draft, because after 2 months, you will have 60,000 plus words. Because some nights you write a little more than 1,000 words. The goal, however, is to not write less than 1,000 words. For example, last night I wrote 1,001 words. And I'm okay with that, because that meets my goal. So after 2 months, I have a first draft taken care of. Now, I even take this a little further. I take my routines even further than that. So to the point where now the process of me creating a manuscript that's ready for an editor is always the same. 1,000 words a night. For 2 months, I finish the manuscript, first draft. Then I immediately go back and reread the first draft to catch any obvious mistakes that I'm able to catch because I'm not an editor. Once I've gone through that first draft, that draft, I then send the draft to my beta readers. As the beta readers' input comes in, if it's something that needs to be changed, I change it. After all of the input from the beta readers is done, I go through, reread it one more time, catch any more mistakes that I might find. Then I send it to the editor, to the publisher, whichever. Then the editor and I go back and forth. Once that's complete, it gets one more proofreading, and then it goes off to the publisher. That is how I do every book now. And if you're concerned that you can't reach that point, trust me, you can. And it all begins with you giving yourself a block out of every day to do nothing but write. And start out by making it an hour whenever you can. But eventually make that time the same time of day. And then eventually make that goal 1,000 words in that hour. And then eventually, if you can expand that hour to be longer, do so. At this point, my time for writing fiction is open-ended. I just have to reach that goal of 1,000 words. And I don't usually shoot for more. I know writers that just start writing and they end with wherever they end. I find that at some point returns start to diminish and my effectiveness of writing starts to decline because my brain just gets fried. And I don't ever want to get to that point where I'm writing, my writing is impaired. I like to end, and I do this every time, almost every night. I end at a point where most people would say, oh my gosh, why don't you keep going? Because when I get into a groove, I'm going in an upswing, whatever, everything's flowing really well. If I stop, then when I pick it up the next night, I am immediately thrown back into that groove. So I always look at this as one long continuous process broken into little chunks. And as you can do that for yourself. You can lay out a pie chart or whatever you need to say finished book, proofreading, beta readers, and break it down into smaller and smaller chunks till you get down to that 1 hour every day of writing. And remember, Edward Lee once, who is a fantastic splatterpunk author, once told me way back, way back, when I asked him how he did it, his advice was very simple. If you write 1 page a day, by the end of the year, you have 365 pages. So if you're not worried about writing a first draft of a novel in 2 months, think about it that way. Think about, if I write 1 page a day, at the end of a year, I'll have a full book. And that's exciting. And you can do it. And even if you have to start out that way, just figuring out how many words you have to write to fill a page, write that many words every day. And by the end of the year, you'll have your book. And once you've written your first one, then you can go, hey, let's see if we can make this a little bit more efficient. Routine. Trust me, routine is your friend. Just as long as it doesn't creep into your stories, into your plots, and into your characters. You don't want to make that routine. Just make the process of creating all of that a routine. Anyway, that's all I got to say this week, Muse. I hope that it's inspired you or helped you in some way, or maybe entertained you. I don't know. I'm not really funny right now. I don't feel it. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. I love you all. Life is good. Look in the mirror. Look yourself in the eye and say, I can do this. I can do this. Why? Because you, my friends, you are awesome. I don't remember where that came from, but I like that routine.